ancestor of the Fauerbach family that founded the Fauerbach Brewing in Madison in 1870s. You'll tell us exactly when it did. Closed in the early 60s, and for 20 plus years until Capital Brewing opened in Middleton, there was no brewery in the Madison area. Now there are, Joe, how many breweries are there in Dane County?
Oh, Dane County, I don't know. I have a
At least, probably. So, Peter is going to tell us the history of the brewery tonight. Tell us a little bit about his history. So for more. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Is it Bill?
No.
Bill, I'm sorry. A lot of things going on here, but and this is the first time I've done a presentation. Usually it's book signing, right? And the one I did earlier, the last one I did was in July at the Fauerbach Condo. There's 37 unit owners over there, and did it on the lawn, and it was just gorgeous out there. And again, I thought it was book signing, so I show up, and David Molinoff, he's a local historian, he's speaking, and then Don Last, the board member over there, said, "Okay, Peter, you've got an hour. Go ahead." I'm going off the cuff, but it was really fun, and that's kind of what we're going to do here. A couple housekeeping things. There are 20 books on the table back there. If anybody wants one while I do this, this is a PDF of the book. And I'm going to go through probably too much, but certain pages, and you'll see those. So you don't have to have a book in front of you if you don't want. And then in the back, on the bar back there, there's some things that Bill asked me to bring, some items of interest, and these are kind of ancient things that are back there that should be fun for you to look at. And they can be passed around too, I don't know. There are a couple mugs back there that were made by my grandfather, one by Grandpa Carl and one by my dad. And it just kind of goes to show you that when you worked in the brewery, you had to load coal, that was your first job. And then you had to learn how to do steam filling, and then you had to learn how to do brazing copper and different metals together, and that's what they did. They're really fantastic. There's a picture back there, a sketch of my Grandpa Lewis on Cherokee. We own, 500 acres at the end of Sherman Avenue, and now that's a park out there. That's where I learned to duck hunt and different things. But that's an 1887 sketch from 3F1. If you are Madison specific historians, you probably recognize that company name. And those are the kind of things that were handed down to all us kids after the brewery closed. Dad, who stopped working there, just did all this stuff, which is now in my attic, right? So that's there. We got some hats. We established some history group pricing, holiday pricing. So you'll see in the book there's a little half slip of paper with the invoice. My credit card scanner is not working on my new phone, so we're doing it the old-fashioned way. It's either cash or take a book and send me a check. That's fine with me. I'm retired. I retired in 2014, and I was in healthcare the whole time. I'm a master's prepared industrial engineer, so a business engineer kind of person. And I moved 14 hospitals into new buildings, the last one of which was Sauk in 2014. And in doing so, I've written, 300 reports. So I've had a website on the history part of the brewery since about 2000. And people started bugging me, people like Joe, when are you going to bring the beer up? Bring the beer back. So I said, well, I got a website, we got hats and t-shirts. Anyway, we brought the beer back for 5 years. And, that didn't work out too well for a number of reasons, but I'm happy actually to be out of that. That was a 7-day-a-week job, including my work life. So 14 when the brewery closed in 66, July 1st. And I'm the oldest of 5. And my dad was a brewmaster and I'm the board secretary. All family owned, so like 5 brothers running the place. And so being the oldest, I thought, okay, well, I probably am more interested in the history of this and have spent a little more time there than my brother and sister. So that's kind of how I got involved in this. A year ago in June, I said, you know, before I kick off, there needs to be at least one record of all of this for my kids. I said, so if I get one done, it's going to be great. Well, we are, I basically wrote it in 4 months. So it was done by Halloween in 2021. But we polished it and we said, well, let's bring it out in April, which is the return of beer date, April 7th, 1932. And that was a big hit. We had some really great book signings. And I've sold 400 in self-publishing the book. And I've got them at the Potosi National Museum, in the gift shop. I've got them at Leopold's on Mill Street. That's it. I don't have them at Barnes & Noble or anything. So you guys are getting kind of a rare book at this point. What else? That's it. Well, so as I said, I've got too much. Like here, there's a 30-minute video of the brewery interior and the bottling line going. I don't have time for this tonight, but I can take it. So this book is 150 pages, and Stu Levitan interviewed me for his book deal. He says it's lavishly appointed with pictures, so you consider it a coffee table book, and it's also the whole story. Over 25,000 words, and some really fun stuff in there, but a lot of pictures. So you'll see that with this. We'll skim through these pages. Yeah, so it covers 120 years, 1848 to 1966. Doesn't cover any of the stuff I did, like bringing the beer back or anything that my cousins Neil and David did. Okay, with that, I'm just going to bear with me. We'll go through this. Oh, I have to tell you a story. My eyes don't work together. I had to quit golfing. I had to quit ice boat racing. And I had to wear a patch to write this book the whole time. So, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Shining where Jack Nicholson's in this resort and he's typing in. At one point he tells his wife, don't you dare come in here. He kind of got like that. It started out real nice, like, who's the guy that lives in Key West and had the 6-toed cats, the author? Hemingway. So it started out like Hemingway and it turned into Jack Nicholson. But, so I would write in the morning and then I would say, I'm so stressed out. I got to go down and have a couple of beers. So I would drink beer from like 1:30 to 3, and that was it. I don't drink at home, right? So that was pretty sweet. And that was a few months. But anyway, just a silly thing. Okay. So. First of all, a note on the Wisconsin Historical Society. They seem to have all the photos that my family ever paid for, from Fauerbach House, McVicker, Brown, and I have them too. So I said, look, you guys, you can make me pay you like $10 a book to put my photos in my book? And they said, nah, we're not going to do that. So I didn't pay them anything except for I didn't have something and they did. And I paid for digital copy or whatever. So all the contributions to this by other people, they were probably the largest. And all of the images that are from them are listed in a separate appendix page. So a lot of people that open places like this want to get some of that old history, like horse-drawn beer wagon and stuff, and some pictures of it in society. So they're to be mentioned for sure. I'm 70, so I was born in 52, and the brewery closed when I was 14. again, the timeline just covers 1848. That was even before it was owned by Fauerbach, so we'll go through that. The first owner of the property was a guy named Reinhard Sprecher.
Yeah, I'm a little old, I'm vastly older than you are, and I would either like you to speak up or you can take my...
Oh, sure.
I think it's on.
If it's green,
Okay.
yeah.
Keep it close.
Forgive me for bending down and being a blind guy. Is that better for you?
Before I know.
Okay. So Sprecher basically had a brew pub, and he had Sprecher had a brew pub.
Yeah, that's good.
He had a cast iron kettle. He had 2,000 cigars. He had bottles of wine, and the location was right down where all the trade routes ended. People bringing goods in from Milwaukee would basically end up where the Essen House, Implement Row, Fauerbach Brewing Company location. Perfect location. And he ran that place until his death in 1860-ish. And then for 8 years it was run by some local brewers who are named in the book. They leased it from Mrs. Sprecher. And then she got married and said, I want to sell this. So Peter Fauerbach had been in Wisconsin at that time, in Portage and in Lisbon, and with 4 or 5 growing families. They all kind of decided where they were going to go and make their living, including the Hausmans, the Bierbauers, the Breckheimers, all the brewers that you've probably heard about. So Peter took it over basically 1868. And even though it says since 1848 on our advertising literature, which really goes back to when the beer was first brewed on that property. So when I started, it was basically a question of, I'm going to do this chronologically. We're going to have a timeline, right? And I just said, okay, let's do it that way. We ended up with 12 chapters. The second chapter had to be pushed to the back and made an appendix because it was about the brewers in Germany. They all lived within a very small circle around Frankfurt, including Anheuser, Eberhard Anheuser, who's kind of a mystery of the Anheuser-Busch family, Bierbauer, Hartl, Fauerbach, Sprecher. And then also we've got appendices and galleries beyond the chapters. And in there you'll see pictures of all the homes the Fauerbachs owned in Madison. You'll see all the beer labels. You'll see all the directors and their little biographies. All right, it's doing something. So the first part is about the trip from Europe. And in there we have the reasons people came. They were being pushed out of Europe. They were being pulled to Wisconsin. There were flyers you can read about all this. America needed workers. Europe had too many people. The whole thing like in Norway where you have a farm and there's too many kids to run it, so the oldest kid gets it and the rest of the kids have to go do something in the big city. Kind of like that. And there were a lot of things I didn't know that I had to look up. And thanks to 2 sources, Ancestry.com and Newspaper Archives, I was able to really piece it together. It's just wonderful stuff, and you can get it free at home on your own computer if you just log into the Middleton Library or Madison Library. Wonderful search engines. So this goes through, it was before Ellis Island, so they came to a place called Castle Garden in Brooklyn. I believe something like 10,000 people a week came to Brooklyn in the 1840s. There was all kind of revolution in Europe and problems, religious persecution. So here's a schooner, and a graph kind of shows you by ethnicity what the volumes were each year coming over. And so this schooner trip was a 2-week trip, and people basically had bunks on the lower levels, and then all the supplies were down in the bottom, and they didn't have power other than wind power. So it was 2 weeks. There's a picture of Castle Gardens in Brooklyn, and then I've got a trip mapped out from basically up the Erie Canal to, there was a road that went all the way over to near Detroit, and I think the ships came around the Great Lakes and then got into Milwaukee, and that they could take a stagecoach to wherever they needed to go in Wisconsin. So this shows you the first place they actually got into the brewing business was in Utica, New York. You may have heard of FX Matt, Utica Club. It's kind of a famous brewery as they go. And Utica, here, it looks very busy, right? So there was Bierbauer, one of the 5 Bierbauer brothers, all of whom opened breweries. The first guy, Lewis, started his brewery there. So Peter Fauerbach and Carl Bierbauer all stopped there and worked. Their first jobs were like working in a blacksmith shop. So they weren't, even though they might have been trained in Germany for coopers or for brewers, they had to do something when they first got here. And then they finally found this brewery job. And, the guy who came first was Carl Hartle. And this is a picture of his brewery in Portage. It's currently the Chamber of Commerce up there. So he was a little older and a relative. He married my great-great-grandfather Peter's sister, Barbara. So he was kind of running the shots, and he knew the lay of the land, so he said, like to Hausman, we need to go to New Lisbon and open a brewery up there because the railroad's coming in. This is about Civil War time, and they were laying tracks like crazy. He says, you go to New Lisbon and open up a brewery because they're projected to have 2,500 people in the next few years. And so that's where Peter and Bierbauer opened their brewery. After Hausman actually built the cellars up there. So here's kind of a page about Hausman. This is a picture on top of Cherokee Marsh with the Hausmans and the Fauerbachs having a picnic. And there you'll see in front Dolly Hausman and Frederick Fauerbach, who married. And that's the connection with the Hausmans. So all close. All these brewing families were like related in some way, you know. Had the same cultural needs, went to the same outings. And then you'll see a couple cellars that were built. One in Madison and right under Gorham and State. Anybody know Terry over at the car rental shop over there? He told me that he was developing his property and they found these cellars and they quickly filled them in before the city found out. But anyway, you can see the cellars have kind of 2 layers of brick with sod over the top. Kind of, I would say, a cheap way to build a cellar. Now, Milwaukee was a great beer city. They had the cliffs on the lake with the cooling, and they had their cellars in the bluffs over there. So here's where the Fauerbach, Sprecher Fauerbach Brewery was. Right on Blount, right on Lake Minoma. And this is a photo of the Bierbauer Mansion after Peter came to Madison. So he left their partnership in New Lisbon. But it's a wonderful house that made it to the historic register. I won't spend much time on that. This is a picture of their brewery, and this chapter talks a little bit about that connection. I'm going to skip over this. he was a big businessman. He had this mill where they were generating lumber. And here's the sandbar maps are another great source of information. You can see what kind of utilities they had, what their layouts were, what was fire rated. It was for the fire departments primarily, but it just yields so much information. And I've got all these in the book for, now here's Peter in Madison. This is when he took over the Sprecher Brewery, this is what it looked like. It's not the castle picture you saw at the beginning. So the one in the front here is residence on floor 2, brewery in the bottom and the back, and then the saloon on the right. This is what they call a factory scene. Many businesses had all their people out front, you know. So this is 1868 to 1890, and then after that, they incorporated. Peter was dead, and they went on a big 15-year building plan and came up with the castle structure, and that's how that happened. Here's a picture of Peter, and another great source of information are the city directories. You can see where people lived and what their job was. So here, I figured out that Peter was working under Sprecher Brewery heading in the directory until 1873. He was proprietor of the Sprecher Brewery. Now here, we found, let's see, where was this information? We found all of the estate documents for these guys. And so in their wills or in their estate, it would list what their assets were. And in here you can see in scribbling that Sprecher had something called hogbacks. Joe probably knows what these are. I think they're bigger than a barrel. A barrel's 31 gallons. These are half barrels. So twice that out of wood or later stainless steel. But a hogsback would have been more like a cask or something on the order of 53-gallon bourbon barrel, I'm guessing. Do you know what? No? Okay. So he had a bunch of those. He had 70 half barrels. He had 200 quarter barrels, some 138 barrels, so many gallons of brewed beer. So at that time, anybody familiar with the Fauerbach property? No? Well, it wasn't always as far out into the lake as you see now. The railroad track, when they laid the tracks through the center of the isthmus, Fauerbach and the ice houses that were in Implement Road wanted a rail spur behind the building. And so to do that, they had to build it on pilings. There was no earth in there. And so they added what they called 8 rods, which is 128 feet of land, thousands of loads of soil. And at that point, the city didn't have any control over that. They just controlled where the roads came down to the water. So a landowner could do whatever they wanted. And there was a big beef about it, but they got it accomplished. Somebody asked how many breweries were there in Madison. Well, there were at least 3. They would have collected their own ice in the early days. They would have brewed their own beer, and they would have had it available in kegs. Bottles didn't come till after Civil War. Some brewers, like this photo shows, were not really brewers. They were bottling houses. So this is an example of what Empire Brewery did from State Street. They were listed in the directory, and they would get kegs of Schlitz beer, hang them on the ceiling, and pipe beer down to bottles. And they were called the brewers. So, you know. This also shows you, my family had a world champion ice boat in 1914, the Princess. And you'll see a chapter about sports in the book, baseball, ice boating. But this shows you how early there was a Madison boat, this is 1870. So they were out there ice boating at a very early point in time. And when the trains came in, there were stories told that they used to race the trains that would go where Law Park is right now. So these are the boys. And then you see, after Peter died in 1886, his wife becomes the president. And for 5 years, and you can see letterhead here that I don't know where I got this, but I guess I'm the keeper of all the family stuff nobody knows what to do with. So you can see Mrs. Peter Fauerbach, proprietress. We got a bunch of that stuff. So for 5 years, I don't know, she at least went to the board meetings, you know, and voted on whether they were spending money or capitalizing more money or what. This is a famous picture about 1905 of the horse-drawn beer wagon. There's 37 full barrels from Hess Cooperage in the Schenck neighborhood. So my good friend Gary Hess and I have been doing presentations of his family thing for, I don't know, 15 years. And he's an amazing guy, but he's convinced that my Grandpa Carl convinced his grandpa to come from Prairie du Chien to Madison to open a cooperage here. And he was trained at Pilsner Urquell, which is like the place in Czechoslovakia. That was quite a friendship. I would say it's been said that Frank Hess was my grandpa's best friend. Now here, interesting, one of the 5 boys in the first family, Peter's family, was a guy named Willie, and he was kind of a feeble person, but he was said to be the best violinist in the area, let's put it that way. So here he is on the docket at the state capitol for the men's choir. And I don't know how I got that either, but I've got that. And it shows, I don't know, some other addresses at this point. But when they did the big project in 1900, they had to close down the residence and make way for the new brick structure. So they all moved into the Marquette neighborhood, and you can see all those homes. So here's another personal wills and estates for Becker and Fauerbach. Those are all laid out. You can see what assets they had in the house and what they had in the brewery. It's all penciled in, but it's very interesting. You can see that they had 3 horses and 2 pigs and 4 delivery, wagon type things, and how many beds they had in the home, and it's pretty amazing. And also we had in Maria's estate, which was in a box at the historical archives, what she owed when she died. And so you can see the butcher's bill and the drugstore bill and what they ate. Oh my God, it's just totally similar to what we do, you know? I thought that was interesting. Family-owned brewery, stock certificate. So in this chapter we go over the German culture. Let me just see here. 2 things come to mind. Scheutzen Park, anybody heard of the shooting park? Well, over by Schenck neighborhood, there were 26 acres that were devoted to the German club. And they would have turkey shoots, they would have ice cream socials, they would have dancing. And we found out on one of the maps where the border was for the Scheutzen Club, and then we could find out a lot of stories about it. And that's all documented in here. Now here you can see, I mentioned ice briefly. Monona had many piers and many ice houses. It wasn't just that Conklin had one over at Madison Park. Conklin had a couple on Monona. There was one for Breckheimer. They got their ice out of Wingra, and Fauerbach got its ice right in the backyard. And Hausman, I don't know where they got theirs. I think from Lake Mendoza. But so there were all these piers, and there were all these steamboats that would take people on excursions to like Scheutzen Park or Olin Park. And I'm going to show you something later. I actually have a steamboat landing sign in my office that's 8 feet long. And it's got the hand saying, steamboats this way, you know. Okay, we'll go, let's get, oh, there it is, right there. So this is a lithograph, and just a section of it shows you the gazebo, the ice house, the steamboats, and the sign. And then, but as I said, it's 8 feet long. Okay, I'm gonna go faster here. These are some characters who were at Chosen Park. I don't know doing what, but I have that photo and nobody really knows what they were doing. We can only speculate. The Madison Corps is a group that's been around forever, even in Germany, and I found a picture of a Fauerbach where they came from, and this is 1858. And so go into that. There was a big love of singing in the brewing, in the German culture. In fact, the badge icon on, like that case back there, and a lot of our artwork was originally a harp, or a harp, not exactly a harp, but it's shaped like a badge. I forget the name of the instrument. But that's what it comes from. Okay, so here are the beer styles. Everybody says, well, what kind of beer did they make? Well, they basically made lager beer right from the start. I was amazed to find that, you know, we always see these pottery bottles and they were called wheat, and they were thick and they wouldn't break. But lager beer was made and bottled in Madison right about 1850s. It's amazing. And the Germans who came here had to use barley that didn't produce enough sugars for the brew, so they had to add a secondary sugar source. And what did they use? Well, they used anything from potatoes, mainly corn, or rice, or oatmeal, but most often it was corn. Typically 40%, what they call an American adjunct style beer. Number one selling beer in the country is a Bud Light. And I don't drink it, and it uses rice, but it just goes to show you that, you know, they're not all malt, and it's not all barley. But thank God for homebrewers and for brew pubs. So this was an ad right here for something called Nectarine, and it was supposedly a sleep and rest aid that was available in pharmacies. This is 1898. So, and the tagline was, drink consistently and continuously. Okay, I know you're awake now because you laughed. These are some early labels. You know, the first pasteurization was about 1892. And as I said, most of the beer you were getting then was keg beer. But these are some of the first paper labels. A lot of the early bottles had etched in the glass was the name of the brewery. But I have bottles that have both the paper label and the etching. So that's a rare one if you can. This is a convention, and I'm not, you know, they quite often were joining these grocers conventions. And a lot of the advertising that I saw said, order a case today, delivered to your home. Made me think of a milkman, a milk type product. That was before all the rules about the 3-tier law in Wisconsin, where you got to have the brewer has to invoice, the middleman has to invoice, the retailer has to sell the beer. And of course, if you're in the craft business and you make under 3 million barrels, there are exceptions to that. And like here, I bet they probably can sell beer off premise here if they have the right license. So things have changed in a good way. But I was so surprised that a lot of this was home delivered, you know. So anyway, this is probably a grocer's convention display. Now, I have all my dad's logbooks from his brews. He was a brewmaster from 57 till they closed, so 10 years. And every day they would do 6,000 pounds in a 150 barrel copper kettle. And the brewery basically was designed to do one brew a day, every day. They were kind of landlocked. No room to grow down on Blount and Williamson Street, right? So this brewery was, I think, designed to max out at what you see here, 150 barrels a day. And they typically did that. If you look at the log sheets, you'll see that, just like here. This is January 50s, in the 50s, and it starts out with brew number 1, and all the ingredients that went in there. And so I just put in some, like a thumbnail sketch, what the actual recipes were for the Pilsner, you'll see on the bottom right, and then the Bach beer on the bottom left. And some of the early ads. So, okay, this is an interesting photo of, they used to do their own malting, so they would take the barley from the farmers, they deliver a wagon load up to the brewery during the season, and the brewery would then, when they were going to make a batch of beer, they had to malt the barley first to get it to germinate and be useful in the brew. So these are 3 guys from ancient guys. They stopped malting probably, I'd say, definitely after Prohibition, but probably before. So here's some artwork and a Christmas card on the upper right of the malt tower. Every brewery must have a shovel on their malt tower. Otherwise, it's bad luck. You know, that's the story. So the Christmas card in blue, the oil painting, which I have, and then the sign that says what the importance of the weather vane is. And here's some guys that are unloading, I don't know, probably 80 to 100 pound bags of barley. Comes up a conveyor up high, and everything starts high in the brewery and goes down, and down the back dock you get all the cases going on the trucks, right? Most breweries don't do this. You know, they may do it with their specialty malts, but they got a big silo outside, right? So, a lot of work. Something about hops. Turns out, for a while, Madison was the center of hop production. Not long, but it goes into that a little bit here. So the next chapter, how are you doing here? 8 o'clock. What do you think, Bill?
Another 20 minutes or so?
Okay. People said the beer tastes better when the lake was high. And I thought, wow, that's terrible. They weren't using lake water for beer. Are you kidding me? Winona? Because they're out, the MG&E outlet's right next to where the brewery was, right? It's the worst. But you can see here they had an 8-inch water line going down Willie Street. And you can see the ice houses. And you can see the dark spots on there are the boilers. I'm gonna skip on here. So I got the fire maps from, turn of the century. Okay, now. There's some other ones. Shows you how the property developed. This is 1908. You can see Madison Gas and Electric was right at the bottom of that on the shoreline originally. Interesting. These things are in the back. The candle holder that they pound into a post. This is obviously before electricity or natural gas. So they're using kerosene, wood, and I guess those are the 2 things that heated or lit the brewery. Homemade candle, I didn't bring that one. A lantern, and you know, they didn't have telephones until late in around 1900. So Badger 15, you brought a box, and on the end it says Badger 15. Well, the first 400 phone numbers, you guys probably know this. The first phone exchange just had a very limited number of lines that they ran to 400 businesses that the person at the equipment could connect people. So before that, you'll see postcards here, and they're pre-stamped, and on the back it would be, you fill in your order. And so for definitely the rural areas where you don't have a guy coming up every day with kegs, you had to order your beer through the mail. So you were given a stack of these. I found that to be very insightful. They did not have a cellar. So how did they cool their beer? Well, that machine at the top is called an ammonia compressor. And they had a cellar, which was a room like this, or 10 times this big, that had ice 2 feet thick on the walls. And that's how they kept their vats of beer cold. The cellar was not really, well, it was probably in the lower level. But that's what those machines are for. And this wheel is like 12-foot diameter, and it itself weighs a ton or 2 tons. So you can just imagine. I remember being in that room where all the generators were, and the old compressor and the new compressors, and it was noisy and hot, but it was the coolest room to walk through. And they had wrenches in there that were like this long. Chrome, polished, open-end wrenches that would turn big nuts on these machines like that. And they had them displayed on the wall. It was just cool. So here we go. We got the new brewery, 1890 to 1905, 15-year project. One thing I want to note here is that there's a star on the front of the building over the, what they call schooners, the trolley cars. If that was lit, it meant the bar was open. And so that leads me into there's no free lunch. You've heard of that? All the patrons of the brewery who own businesses were mad that the brewery was giving food away as long as you kept drinking nickel beer. And so they had to stop a certain amount of being open and doing that. And the star came down when the schooners came in. And that was about 1929. This is a picture of the Capitol early construction showing the Princess ice boat and one of the big ace gals for summer sailing that were Fauerbach Brewing. This is the fall festival, so every fall they would have a gathering. That's where you'd see those booths like I showed you. This is the bar, and I don't have very good pictures of this, but 2 things to note. It was bought out of a catalog from Bergen, Brunswick. It's quarter-sawn oak. I have pictures in the book. It's beautiful. You'll see the spittoons in the ground. They were the only spittoons in the city that were auto-flushing. No handling spittoons. And so everybody, the bartenders love that, right? This is a big stained glass that was part of that. I have some journals. Actually, they're, I suppose, general ledgers. I have 2 of them, 1907, 1908, and it shows salaries, sales, expenses. They're very interesting stuff. Names of people who were customers. So in the book, you'll read what the brewmaster's salary was, for example. And then here's the timeline that shows you from 1890, when they got started with the expansion, to 1905 when it was done. Wolf Kubley did the clock on the tower. So they used local architect. His name, he's the guy who built the Red Gym. His name was Porter. And then Conover was the local, he was also an architect and worked at UW, but he had a construction company. So everything was pretty much local. In the business office, there was a mural, 10 by 16, and there's a color photo later you'll see. This is a newspaper clipping, but the guy who, I discovered the guy who painted that. It took him more than 2 weeks to finish it. And his name was Snyder, and he was from the American Panorama Company in Milwaukee. And the reason I know that is that Dad was interviewed And he said it was painted by some guy named Snyder, and of course they spelled it wrong, right? S-C-H instead of what the actual spelling was. But I learned who did that, and I was just thrilled about that. Here's my aunt. The day the thing closed, July 1st, 1966, she's pregnant. She lays down in the business office with her little brownie camera, and that's all she could get of it. But it must have been gorgeous, 10 by 16, you know? There's an example of the coloring of the oak. But people always say, well, why didn't they save the building and turn it into apartments? Oh my God, it was so full of cement and rebar and unusable spaces. No chance. You know. Let's see, we'll keep going here. I got it down. This is Prohibition. There's a whole chapter on Prohibition. You can see breweries changed the name on their labels, so as to confuse the public, I'd say maybe. They were like, Budweiser had Bevo, Fauerbach had Faba, and it was brewed to the fullest extent, and then the alcohol was taken out down to 0.5%. They didn't sell a lot of it. The year before national prohibition, Madison went dry. They could brew beer, they couldn't sell it in Madison. You could drink it at home. So Hausman and Fauerbach set up depots in Middleton. And at that time, you're talking a train ride or horse and carriage, buddy ride, or take a boat over to the club restaurant on Branch Street. And people could get their beer there and take it home and drink it. That was 1918. So I'm going to skip through here. During Prohibition, Uncle Henry quit the brewery and tried to redevelop this hotel here on Martin Luther King Drive, the Avenue Hotel. And he had the brewery co-sign. And then it went under, and so the brewery had to pay off a $100,000 note. But they had a plan to build a $650,000 thing, and that's all documented here. This is interesting. My mom and dad were prom king and queen at Madison High. Great-grandpa Roscoe was a Methodist minister on my mother's side who led the dry movement in the Madison area. Can you believe it? And he never knew that they got married. He died before they got married. Now that's ironic. So this details, he said the two favorite days on the planet for him were 1918, the end of World War I, and 1919, Prohibition. So that's all very interesting. Property sold, yeah, so this shows you just a little bit of the Essen House area, and anytime a bar couldn't pay their beer bills, one option was to have the brewery buy the bar. So they ended up with a lot of properties, most of which were sold to survive Prohibition. Very interesting, and it goes into the Fauci family, and you'll recognize a lot of the places down in that area that were owned by the brewery at one point. These are some of the labels from Prohibition. This is an ad the day before the beer came back. This is the day the beer came back, the famous picture. And let's see, soft drinks began in 1929. Some people think, well, that's pretty amazing. Well, they were focused on beer, and so they had to use the plant across the street on Blount Street to do the soda pop because they just didn't have the space in the brewery. And then Pepsi, they got the Pepsi franchise in 1930, early 30s. But they did their own at first. Here's the Pepsi plant. And do you guys know there was a marina on Lake Monona, right at the end of Blount Street? It was called Four Lakes Marina. Four Lakes Marina. And I remember that boat. And there was a pier, and Dad had a boat there. And it was right down the hill from, this is Brighton Box, if you know the history of that Willie Street area. It sits right on Willie and Plum. And this is a picture of all the drivers. Okay, changing industry. Let's go faster. So they didn't waste any money. This label at one point said half a percent alcohol, and they just punched out the words that they needed to be able to use it, right? Here's some more labels that they had a lot of labels in 1933 through 1940. And when they had to reopen the brewery, everything needed to be restored to good working order. So they were good friends with the Chicago Northwest Railroad station right across the street. And they lent them a steam engine to power the boilers for 8 days while they put new boilers in. I thought that was kind of a fun story. So that's Grandpa and the crew from the bricklayers. A brand new truck from Ideal on Park Street, Ideal Body Shop. A parade float, right, into Prohibition. Cross Plains has done this about every 5 years. They'll have a parade. The first Madison phone book, May 1933. What does it say at the very top? Order your case of beer, right? Here's a place in Nebraska that has a Fauerbach sign. So I think they were pretty much Midwest limited and followed the railroad lines. I found them in South Dakota, Nebraska, odd places, Minnesota, and it all was close to the railroads. Avoca, Wisconsin, right at the rail station there was a bar they owned. Tiny little town, right? There's a couple interesting stories. I'll go quick. There was a 3-year contention with Pabst about Blue Label beer, and you can see Blue Label on our label. And so the result was nobody went to court, and both brewers changed their labels 3 years later. So the Pabst with the blue ribbon was taken off, and this one went. They just took the words off. And then the second one is Red Dot potato chips. Who knows Red Dot? Okay. That guy was up north at a place I've been to before, Prescott. He's in a bar, and they're selling things. Bar food was anything in vinegar. Eggs, pig's feet, no chips, right? So he's up there because he has a research plot to grow the best potatoes for his Red Dot factory. And he says, in Madison, the best food pairing with beer is Red Dot potato chips and Fauerbach beer. And so he says, you gotta get a keg of beer. So this goes through that whole story, and as the first guy who wrote about this here says, it's the reason there are chips in bars all over the nation. Anyway, I like that. So these are just going through what happened in the nation and locally during these different 10-year periods, the last periods of the brewery. I have all the corporate records, so I could see the income statement for the year before they closed. They lost $150,000, which in today's dollars was over $1.5 million. And at that point, my grandpa was not able to be general manager. He was ill. Bill, the brother, had died on a vacation trip. Dr. Louie, who was a physician around town, was running the place the last year. Had consultants coming in. And this is when Schlitz came out with Old Milwaukee. And they destroyed over 20 breweries during the 60s by underpricing it. $1.80 a case. And our consultant said, least you can go is $2.50. So they said, well, we're going to close the door. And that's what they did. And then Schlitz got sued, but it was too late. Potosi, Effinger, you name it, they all closed. This used to be on the square. It was a 3-story neon where Anchor Bank and Park Hotel, that intersection. So for 13 years, this had As a lady wrote to me about a month ago, one color when it lit up, and a different color when it came down, and then both colors came out. And I don't have a picture of it, but the fact that you could have a 3-story neon on a square for 13 years is pretty amazing, right? So, yeah, that's basically all the good stuff. Sports, that's a picture of the Princess in front of the brewery with the ice houses. Community sports, lots of newspaper. You know, the reporting of sports results was so much better back then. The paper had every little intramural, bowling league, fun to read about. So they sponsored bowling. I even found hockey skates that had Fauerbach on them. Ice boating for sure. There's a lot in here about ice boating. Baseball teams. The Old Timers, 1913, FPC. Yeah, that was before Prohibition. And there was a bar under the Bree Stevens stands at that time. It was called the Trophy Room. And Fauerbach was like 6 blocks away, right? And they just managed, whenever there was a game that adults, where they could buy beer, they had beer there. Special stories. These 2 mugs are in the back. I was talking about those earlier. People sent me stories over the year. The no free lunch story, the brewery star. Gang initiation, there was a guy I met, Ray Barais, who lived across the street from the brewery. When I met him, he was 92. And he wrote me type letters that are just, you can't believe how valuable those were to me. But anyway, one of the fun things was there was a great big old vat in the back by the rail line where broken glass would go. And some of the broken glass came in from a chute, so it would end up on the rim. And the gang initiation was to walk around the rim in bare feet. You know, if you didn't get caught by the brewery guys. Anyway. Yeah, this sign right here. I'm going to just take my last 30 seconds and read this. You know, somebody mentioned short fills, that you could come up to the brewery at the pier and you could get a nickel short fill bottle. But this is a sign in the driver's coat room regarding the free short fills for employees. Nobody would criticize a person for wanting a little eye opener first thing in the morning. And a mid-morning break with a cold one is always a nice picker-up. And certainly the noon lunch tastes better when accompanied by a couple of cold CBs. And then mid-afternoon it keeps going on. Certainly at the end of the day, we've earned the right for a couple before heading home. But this damn constant sip, sip, sip all day long has got to come to a halt. Another special story is Maynard Polinsky. I was contacted by his daughter, and so I looked through everything I had. I wanted to see if I had any photos or whatever of Maynard. Turns out I had 3 and a video, and so she's like almost tipping over at Christmas time when her daughter presents him to his son, and it just made a big hit. And a story about a guy who took issue with my grandpa that was fired and rehired on a daily basis. The Cherokee Marsh, the cabin out at the end there, the parties they had, they used a Norwegian butcher and he would hang, they had T-bones all the time. And it was, you can think of like a big beer tent, and they'd invite friends and salespeople and bar owners. I remember those parties. Anyway, those T-bones were green when they had to trim them before they put them on. It's just like you would have moldy sausage or cheese, right? And they were the best T-bones. Okay, so then there's this about the Europe part where all these guys came from. Background on the brewers. That's about it. I could keep going. Questions?
First of all, thank you.
That brought back a lot of memories for me. Questions here?
You talked about how much money they lost in the last year or two or whatever. Was there a particular reason? Were their sales dropping off, or what was happening?
Sales dropped off because of the old Milwaukee being flooding the market at $1.80 per case.
Cheap beer.
Yeah. Well, I'm old enough to remember Fauerbach beer actually being on the market, and because they turned 18. But I have this recollection that it wasn't a terribly popular beer at that time in the last few years.
Oh, the last few years, they changed the recipe just to survive.
We had Pabst and Schlitz and Miller High Life, and there's just a lot of
Yeah,
companies.
they had to use liquid corn, and I'm not sure it was very good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Everybody, there's books, and just send me a check when you can. There's hats.
Got it?
Well, quick question for you, did Fauerbach have their own rail cars, ice cars, or did they use somebody else's?
There were 2 cars that I'm aware of that had the name painted on the side.
No, I mean, did they employ their own ice cars for shipping beer?
Only 2, and I don't think they were reefers today that were powered. I think they might have had ice in them to help.
Right,
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. Was the Fauerbach grocery store any relation to the
Yeah.
brew?
Second cousins.
Oh,
Okay.
It's all one family.
okay.
You guys are legends.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you.